If you're a writer dreaming of becoming a successful author, join me, writing coach Karenna Akavane, on the How to Be an Author podcast, your weekly source for writing information, inspiration, and motivation. Writers, and especially writers of fiction, whether we are seasoned authors or brand new writers, we all face certain challenges and hurdles on our writing journey. And oftentimes, these are common issues that we all run into. In this season of the How to Be an Author podcast, writing coach Karenna Akavane, PhD, that's me, helps you through all of these issues, whether it's mindset, writing skills, or the business part of being an author. I'm going to be digging into the archives of my most memorable client interactions to bring you the stories of real writers who came to me with huge problems that they were having in their writing career. I'm not going to be naming names, but I'm going to be telling the whole story of how they came to me and what kind of things we were able to do to help them to move through some of these really common issues that might be impacting you as well if you're a writer. Again, as a writing coach, I don't just address storytelling issues. I'm also addressing all aspects of the writer's life, from mindset to business and everything in between, because each of these issues can hugely impact a writer's success. So in each episode, we're going to be bringing up 3 different clients, 3 different problems, and I'm going to try to be grouping them thematically, but they're always going to have to do with the craft of writing, the mindset issues and the psychology of writing and of being a writer, and the business of writing and marketing your novel. This is episode 1, the first one in the new season, and we're going to be talking about cringy characters, writing characters that aren't cringy, also finding the strength to put yourself out there, being the main character of your own writer's life, and also if you are writing as a pseudonym or if you have an alter ego, how do you market yourself without feeling yucky and without having all of these roadblocks that happen when you're not promoting yourself as a person? You're creating a whole new writer avatar. And this is actually quite the gift for you. So let's start to jump in and talk about all things character, personality, mindset issue, and the business of promoting yourself as the character, the main character of your own writer's life. So my client, Sarah, came to me because she had just sent her book out to beta readers, which is a good thing to do. And they had come back to her and they'd said, I like the story, but your characters aren't something that I can get emotionally invested in. I'm feeling like I don't really relate to your characters. I'm getting confused about who's who. And I'm just feeling like there's something missing in this whole story. And Sarah was desperate. By the time she got to me, she's like, this is a huge issue, but I don't understand why my characters aren't likable. They're really, really cool characters in general. And so we started looking at her characters and we started troubleshooting to see what was going on. And what I found was that in Sarah's work, there were some main issues with her characters that are common to so many writers. And this kind of made her feel better because she thought that she was the only one having this problem, and that is not the case. So the first problem was that Sarah had too many characters in her book. And she asked me, and rightly so, she said, so why are you saying I have too many characters? What are the characters that are necessary versus the characters that aren't necessary? Now, I've always been a proponent of not having too many characters because it prevents your reader from getting emotionally invested in each one. You've only got a certain number of words in your book, and I want to take a really deep dive into the minds of 1 or 2, maximum 3 characters that I get really close to. Of course, we have our supporting characters as well, and they're characters that every novel needs, but really you can do quite well with a smaller cast of characters, and often I think, especially with a newer writer, this is something that works really, really well. It's a better idea to have less characters rather than more. So which characters do we really, really need? Number 1 is the protagonist. This is the character that things are happening to, and they're the character who is actually actively doing things, right? They're acting. That's where the word protagonist comes from. Now, what is it about this protagonist that's going to make them someone that your reader is going to be invested in emotionally? They have to be relatable. So one of the mistakes that Sarah was making is that her protagonist was too perfect. Her protagonist was super awesome, really strong, really cool, good looking, just basically all around somebody who should be super likable because they're great. This is the issue. Too many of us are afraid of writing a protagonist who's more nuanced. So we end up with a protagonist who's not likable because they're too perfect. If you've heard of the term Mary Sue, this is a character that you have probably put yourself into. They're an idealized version of yourself. They're strong, they're smart, they're good looking, they're awesome. Everybody likes them except for your reader because they're too perfect. So instead of making your character better, what can you do in terms of giving them a fault or a weakness that's actually going to create some issues for them throughout the book, and they're going to have to grow? Because that's the other major thing, is that Sarah's characters were too static. They weren't changing throughout the novel. They weren't growing. Any good character needs to grow and change throughout the novel. That's a really, really major issue. So to make a character relatable, they have to have flaws. They need to have really strong desires. They need to grow and change throughout the story. And the reader needs to be crystal clear as to what this character's motivations and desires really, really are. Therefore, your character actually needs to know what they want. And this is another issue that a lot of writers have. Their characters are kind of doing things, but the motivation isn't there. It's not strong enough. This is something that's so important. When I troubleshoot with an author, I often do this with them where I'm like, let's talk about the motivations. Why do they have these motivations? What's the backstory? Why is this happening? Why do they feel that they need to find this thing, do this thing, achieve this thing, whatever it may be? The motivation needs to be there, and it needs to be something that is this goal that keeps being taken away from them because of the obstacles, and they're forced to grow in order to actually get there. Another character that you need besides your protagonist is the antagonist, right? Many people say, well, my antagonist is the powers that be, or it's the government, or it's nature, or it's whatever. That's fine. It's often useful if you have a character that embodies the antagonistic forces. Now, to make your antagonist super strong, they shouldn't just be a bad guy. Sarah's antagonist was a bad guy, like just really bad from the get-go, pretty demonic, pretty evil, ugly, all this stuff. And I'm like, no, you need to have your antagonist hold up a mirror to your protagonist. If your protagonist is not careful, they could run the risk of going in that direction and becoming more like the antagonist. And that's part of the motivation for actually learning to grow and change, is to not go there as well, right? Look at somebody like Anakin Skywalker, right? It'd be so easy for them to then, go to the evil side of the Force, and Luke Skywalker, same thing, right? There's a very small difference between, Darth Vader and a hero in this story. And this is the same thing for you. Even if your story isn't adventure or sci-fi, you still have these issues psychologically. The actions of your antagonist need to be relatable too. They need to have internal logic. You need to understand why your antagonist is doing what they do, and it's not just because they're a jerk. Now, when it comes to supporting characters, they shouldn't be all gathering around the main character just there to make them look cool, like they have a bunch of friends. Each supporting character needs to have a role, whether it's as a foil to draw some kind of stark relief between themselves and the main character and their motivations, or maybe they're a love interest, or maybe there's somebody who creates some kind of obstacles because the main character is protecting them or dragging them along. Think about each of your supporting characters and really ask yourself, can my reader differentiate between them? Do they each have their own motivation and backstory? And do they really have an absolute real reason for being there? Because if they don't, you might want to consider combining your side characters and rewriting them so that they're a little bit more relatable and more impactful. This is one of the things that I had Sarah do, and this was super helpful in her story. 1,000,000%. She had way too many characters with similar names, similar backstories, and half the time in a scene, I'm just like, why are there 20 people standing around? This is not working for your story. So once she figured that one out, that really, really helped. Because one of the easiest ways to make your character grow is to isolate them a little bit. So you don't want them to be constantly surrounded by fabulous friends, unless this is actually an obstacle for them. So to recap, what are the ingredients that will make a character emotionally resonant? You've got the backstory, you've got the vulnerabilities of the character, you've got dialogue and action that can give your reader a real sense of what your character is like because of the way that they speak, because of the things that matter to them, how they express things, what their thought process is like. And also there's a lot in the unsaid. You've got internal conflict, you've got character arcs. All of these things are crucial. So if you're thinking, wow, that's a lot to develop for all 12 characters I have in my book, yes, you have a point. You need to think about which of the characters are crucial and which aren't, because I don't think you can develop this for all 12. And then you're going to have some characters that just basically walk across the scene, like the extras, if you will. Like in a movie, you don't need to name these characters or give me too many details about them because I don't need to get invested. For your reader, when you start describing a character and giving them a name, that's shorthand for saying this character is going to be important. Remember who this is. And then they get all confused. Only when a character is emotionally resonant does your reader get invested and start to care about what's happening in your story. So you can have the best plot on earth, but if your characters are weak and not emotionally resonant, your reader's not going to care about what happens. You could think the stakes are super high, but the stakes are only high when we're caring about a character. Now, when I say vulnerable, emotionally resonant characters, it's not rocket science to write one, but it does take vulnerability on the author's part. And this is another issue mindset-wise that a lot of authors run into. And I had this author, Paula, and she had this real issue with, she felt that if she was writing an emotionally resonant, vulnerable character, that it was making her look weak and it was making her look bad. And she thought that people who read her book would judge her and think that she was her character. Now, I'm not going to tell you that this never happens, because I wrote a book where I had friends telling me, oh, that part when you jump across the river, that was really cool. Or, oh, that part where you read the manuscript. And I'm like, dudes, I didn't do either one of those things. That's not me. Maybe the character has some similarities. There's always overlap, but your character could murder somebody. I hope that means that you didn't murder somebody. That would be bad. So I had to teach Paula that really characters can be similar to you, but they can also be different from you. And so we did a few exercises for her to kind of make her feel more comfortable with being vulnerable, with being open, with having these characters who are resonant without thinking automatically, everyone's going to judge me for this. First of all, we all need to recognize that feeling exposed is part of the creative process. Yes, my friend, you did not choose the easiest thing to do. If you wanted to not be vulnerable and not expose yourself, you could have been doing data entry from your home office your whole life. Nobody needs to know who you are. Nobody needs to see what you write. You don't need to spill your guts onto the paper and have people review it, for God's sake. You have chosen this route. And I know it's hard and it keeps getting harder, but it is also very, very rewarding. So tell yourself that this is part of the process for any creative. We put ourselves out there. Like if you look at somebody like Marina Abramovic, who's a visual artist, performance artist, she puts herself out there to the point where she'll be sitting in a gallery and she's got a gun, a knife, and some other objects, and she's letting people interact with her in any way they want, putting herself more at risk than anything that you're doing. So put this all in perspective. Being vulnerable is part of the deal. And you can do this. Your character is not you. So if your character is feeling too much like you, so much so that you can't separate it out and that you cannot draw the line between yourself and the character, and you can't be like, oh no, this isn't me. Truthfully, maybe your character is too much like you. Maybe you are writing too much of a Mary Sue. Maybe you need to look at your character and think to yourself, okay, where's the overlap and where can I differentiate my character enough so that I don't feel like this is me? Because I get it. That's an awkward situation to be in. So we want to avoid that for you. So many people have heard the writing advice, write what you know, so much that they think that they can only write characters who've experienced exactly the things that they have. And then they feel very disingenuous, or they have imposter syndrome when they're writing a character who's gone through different things. Now, I think that there's so many ways that you can find different experiences relatable. If your character went through something completely different, why don't you talk to people who've been through that sort of thing, right? And you can try to really empathize with them and think of fresh ways to express what they went through. You can always think of ways also to relate it to an experience that you had. It doesn't have to be identical, but let's say that your character is ending up on a new planet and, you've never been on a new planet. I get that. But why don't you talk to people who've ended up in a new country where they've just emigrated and they don't speak the language and it's a completely different socioeconomic background or whatever? You can do this too. Talk to them and also think about your experiences. What about that time you ended up in a dance class and you'd never danced before and you're like, what am I doing here? This is insane. They're speaking a completely different language. All these people know what they're doing and I don't. This is, think about all of the different emotions that you're going to have, because it's the emotional resonance that matters most. And then you can do the research for the facts of what's going on in, your story. But research goes a long way, but know that you can reach out and write something that's not you. I think sometimes that can be really helpful in writing a character that's so different that you can easily feel that, okay, I made this emotionally resonant. I tried to make this as real as possible in my mind, but it's quite obvious that this is not me. I think that working in layers helps a lot. So start off with the surface emotions of your characters, start off with the surface descriptions, and then you can get deeper and deeper as you get more comfortable with writing these sorts of things, like a little onion. I think that you can do this. This is what we did with Paula. And we also did some journaling exercises where we talked about her fears of vulnerability. And we wrote a character who was feeling those things as well. And little by little, she started to feel a little bit more comfortable. Now, this doesn't happen overnight, right? And it's not going to be perfect for a long time. You are going to feel uncomfortable. And if you're not feeling uncomfortable, I would hazard to say that maybe you're not pushing yourself enough. So remember that discomfort is probably a sign that you're on the right track. If that makes you feel better, which probably doesn't, but that's okay. Eventually it will. Definitely seek feedback from your beta readers. With Sarah's story at the beginning, we talked about the beta readers. Beta readers are excellent at being able to tell what's not working in a story. Now, they don't know how to fix it. They're not editors. You're not going to ask them for that. But I think that sometimes having a few trusted beta readers is going to be super instrumental in knowing whether you've struck that fine balance of putting yourself out there and creating a character that rings true without completely being you. Remember to set boundaries. Like if you're writing something that makes you feel intensely uncomfortable, it's fair to say that maybe you can take a step back, because I feel oftentimes, and this is something that I've seen like with writers writing love scenes or something, and they're writing something, they're like, I don't feel comfortable going into this detail. Fair enough. Lots of writers don't feel comfortable writing something, and they're going to find readers who wouldn't feel comfortable reading something that's too detailed either. So sometimes I think that it will ring most true if you're writing to the level where you're feeling like you've pushed your limits, but you haven't crossed your limits. You're going to find a reader that this resonates with, I think. But don't be too easy on yourself at the same time. Push your limits until you're feeling that it's not feeling true to me or it's not feeling aligned with me to push any further. And that's totally fair. Connecting with fellow writers is going to be a really crucial, helpful step as well, because everyone's been through this. You're not the only one who's suffering with vulnerability. You're not the only one who's suffering with, is this character too much like me or too different from me? Am I allowed to write this? Talk to fellow writers. Find yourself a critique group or a writing group, or, join a program with a writing coach who's going to talk you through this stuff, because I think that this can be so valuable. Now, in my program From Idea to Publish in 6 months, I really kind of guide you through a lot of the journaling exercises that are going to work you through this. And also you get to talk to me, your writing coach, so that you can feel whether you're on the right track. And I think that's really, really important. So if you're curious about that at all, From Idea to Published in 6 months is a wonderful program. For the next week, you actually still get Writing Coach on Demand with that. So you get a weekly office hour slot with me. After that, you're not going to get the office hour slot, but you will be getting webinars anyway. And if you're the DIY sort of author, you're going to do DIY author, where for only $25 this week, you get the full set of worksheets, reference sheets, everything else that you need to go from idea to published. And after this month, after this week, it's going to be $47, still very affordable, as a way of publishing your whole book, promoting your book at no added cost to you. This is for the author who really does not have the budget, for the editor, for the cover designer, for the website designer, all of that stuff. This is as close as you can get to writing and publishing a book for free and have it be pretty professional quality. So that's something that I've developed for you. I think is really worth it. But if you don't know, go check the website, www.creativeandwritingcoach.com or www.onlinecoursesforwriters.com. Now let's dive back into the last issue, which is putting yourself out there and communicating who you are as an author in your book marketing campaign. This is really important. So many authors feel so vulnerable. They feel so yucky and so pushy when they're trying to market and sell and promote their book. Many of us go, it'd be more comfortable to have a pseudonym. Now, I've done both of these things. I've had a pseudonym and I've had books under my own name. And so in this section, we're not going to be talking about one of my clients. We're going to be talking about what happened with me because I've been there, done that. And I know the challenges that come with promoting yourself and also the challenges that come with promoting yourself as a pseudonym. It's not the easy way out to hide who you are and have a pen name. So it presents a whole list of things that are, maybe a little bit harder, but I do get that you get to hide behind something. But at the same time, here's the funny dichotomy. You have to expose yourself in order for your reader to know who you are, what you stand for, and for you to be communicating on an honest level with them, because that's what it takes to inspire people sometimes to buy your book. It's not easy to get someone to buy your book. And you want this word of mouth to develop. And word of mouth comes when people are feeling that they kind of have an idea of who you are, what you stand for, and what's going to be coming from you next. Because people get invested in your career as a person. And this is where writing under a pseudonym doesn't mean being invisible. If you're thinking about the benefits and drawbacks of using a pseudonym, and if you're worrying about marketing yourself and promoting yourself and it feels icky and you're thinking a pseudonym might be for you, let's listen to part 3 about the whole business part of being an author, marketing yourself under a pseudonym. So let's talk about the advantages of working under a pseudonym. Now, you've got the privacy and the anonymity. A lot of people think about that first. Now, let me tell you that there's nothing like a pseudonym or an alter ego to make people want to know who you are. So when I started writing under a pseudonym, and I've been doing this for a while, but when I started promoting myself under the pseudonym, let me tell you that there were a lot of people who started to try to figure out who I was. There are whole threads on Reddit. There are things online where people are asking who my pseudonym is. And it's just been something where I had to learn to be like, cool. Any attention is good attention, right? So people are trying to track down who I am. That means they care. That means I've struck a nerve. That's not a bad thing. So you don't want to put your home address out, right? But people might find out who you really are. This becomes part of the story. This becomes part of the mystery of why you're writing under the pseudonym. But what are some of the reasons other than this privacy, which might not be completely respected forever? You get genre flexibility, right? Running under a pseudonym means that you can write different genres. You can write something a little bit more spicy than you normally would. You can try out sci-fi. You can try out fan fiction. And you're not tied to this brand that you've already been building as an author under your own name. Wait, you have been building a brand under your own name, right? This is the issue. Whether you're writing under your own name or under a pseudonym, you are very much building a brand. And that brand has a look, it has a feel, it has a message, it has all of these things attached to it because as a brand, you are trying to create an emotion in your audience, who is your reader. So remember that no matter whether you choose a pseudonym or not, you're not getting away from the fact that you are having to promote your brand. Some authors also think I'm going to write under a pseudonym because I don't want people to know that I'm a woman, or maybe that I belong to a minority or whatever. They don't want the stereotypes involved with writing as a certain person. They want to be able to explore a different genre or a different style of writing without any stereotypes. And I think, fair enough. I've got a name that's very difficult to say, to remember, to spell. And that's definitely something that goes into deciding, just like actors who have stage names, you can think of your pseudonym as your stage name as a writer because your real name isn't different enough, or maybe it's too different in your opinion. And that's definitely something to think of. But again, you're building a brand. So think about how all of that fits into your brand. That's going to be really, really crucial. It's not something that you just throw out there. Also, marketing yourself under multiple names can really be time consuming and it can become a little complex. I've had this issue where I've had to work with different mailing lists. I've had to work with different types of messaging, different looks, different social media accounts. Like, your work multiplies the more pen names you have. So for me, I have multiple pen names, but I also have Writing Coach. I also have Empty Nest Author, which is my new company that I'm starting to work on, really aiming at helping people who are in their middle age, trying to write the next chapter. But all of this just multiplies the work. So you need to be really aware of that when you start working on having various pen names. Just something to consider, and don't say I didn't warn you. Also, there are these legal issues. A lot of authors write under pen names and they think, that means I don't need to pay taxes. No, you still need to be pretty crystal clear about that. So you need to see how you're going to be paid, how you are doing business as, and how it doesn't look like you're being disingenuous and trying to hide who you are to try to get away with something. Oftentimes readers might think, okay, they're not using their real name. What about their authenticity? And this all comes back to that idea of communicating from an authentic place and creating basically a persona for each one of your pen names that does resonate with who you are and what you're writing. So think about, just because I'm using a different name, I still need to be speaking a truth. I think that I don't like the thing where an author is going to be playing a role and they're not being honest about who they are. So I was talking about hiding the fact that you're maybe a woman, or hiding the fact that you're from a minority, or whatever it might be. Or maybe you're a man pretending to be a woman. I think that it becomes disingenuous when you're trying to hide that in order to exploit or in order to capitalize on a trend or something like that. I've always told my writers that you should definitely enlist the help of a sensitivity reader or somebody else who's kind of an expert in all of these issues, because if somebody finds out that you're being disingenuous, that news will go so fast. So make sure that your persona as a writer or as your pseudonym is still authentic fundamentally to part of your story. It could be a facet of your story, but it still needs to be pretty honest and sincere, at least emotionally. Now, you're probably wondering, a lot of authors who are like, I'm writing under a pseudonym. Yay, that means I don't need to market myself, because how could I possibly market myself under a pseudonym? I can't do any of this marketing stuff. I really just need to have an agent or a publishing company paying for lots of advertising, and that's the only way to go. That's not true. How can you market yourself under a pseudonym in a way that's effective and that feels like it really belongs to your personal brand? The first thing is, you're gonna need a website for your pseudonym. Yes, you are. And it's going to have a look and feel that corresponds with this persona that you are building. And you're thinking to yourself, well, I can't have a picture of me now, can I? Well, I have pictures of me as my pseudonym. I am in disguise, partially. I'm not going to describe how that is, because I do like to let whoever's figured it out figure it out. If you haven't figured it out, oh well. But I am kind of in disguise. So some people figure it out, some people don't. But it's a uniform look where people know that me in disguise is my pseudonym. You could also have a little Bitmoji or an icon that represents you, or a cartoon version of yourself, or even a animal version or an avatar. All of these things are okay to represent you, or you can be completely invisible but under a name. But then in that case, you need to communicate what you stand for. So whether that means blog posts or book trailers or the visuals or the aesthetic from your book that you're going to show on your website and on your social media, all of this needs to be really well developed. And I say that you still need to be interacting with your ideal reader. So when your reader's commenting on any of that content that you're putting out, you need to think about, what is my tone? How am I responding as this persona? Keep it consistent. That's really, really important. And if you're writing, if you're working with me on Writing Coach on Demand, or if you're working with me, on one-on-one hours or in one of my programs, I definitely will help you to figure out how to strike that balance. That is so important. When you have consistent branding, that is half of the battle. Now, I think that blogging is a really great way of establishing your voice and your tone as the pseudonym, as your persona. And you could continue with this through email communications with your list. Again, building your list. One of the best things you can do, especially when you have a pseudonym,
It really helps to have your message fall right into somebody's inbox. And I think that that's such a gift for you as the writer in terms of the type of reach that you have in your marketing. So the faster you can grow a list, the better. You might be wondering how to do that. That is all inside my courses, all of them, from Idea to Publish in 6 months and DIY Author. And if you are with me in Writing Coach on Demand, I definitely help you step by step in how to grow a list with a strong hook, with a call to action, with a lead magnet, all of that good stuff. Answers are there for you. So when your audience is reaching out to you and you're responding to them, remember that tone. You can even do interviews as your pseudonym, whether you're in disguise or whether it's just an audio interview. Think about creative ways in which you can express who your pseudonym is. Virtual book tours, also a boon for pseudonym writing authors, because you don't need to show up in person and you still get to interact with a lot of readers. I think interaction is so important these days. That's the whole thing with a character, right? When you've got a character that emotionally resonates, that's an alchemy between the character and another person, or the story and a reader. You always need two people. So whether you're going and putting yourself out there at book events and making contacts, or whether you are communicating with your readers, or whether you are writing something or recording something and it's being listened to or read and that there's some interaction going on, that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. I hope this helped, this whole idea of character, how to promote yourself, how to be vulnerable but not too without feeling weird, and how to market yourself, whether you are marketing you or a pseudonym. I think this is really helpful. Sarah, Paula, and me, we all managed to work through these issues, and I hope that listening to their stories and my story has helped you as well. As you go, don't hesitate to reach out via email. creativeandwritingcoach.com has a link for that. And I look forward to being with you next time on the How to Be an Author podcast.
If you have any pressing writing-related questions or would like to be featured on the How to Be an Author podcast, please feel free to reach out on my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com.